Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Wonderful. So Alfred White is a subject matter expert working to prevent youth from encountering the lifelong challenges he has faced. Currently, Alfred battles extensive chronic health conditions that resulted from a generational and lifelong history of trauma and adversity that had begun before he was even born. Alfred has been diagnosed with liver cancer and is awaiting a liver transplant. He also has fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, and a series of other health conditions. The trauma impacting Alfred's mind, body, and soul manifested in his life as substance use, homelessness, and criminality. Despite the extensive difficulty on top of intergenerational trauma and early adversity, Alfred demonstrates a great deal of hope and resilience. Alfred's unique experiences have provided him with valuable insight into supporting youth who have been impacted similarly in their lives. Since 2004, Alfred has received his master's degree in ministry and psychology and is now a licensed psychotherapist who has dedicated his life to helping others heal. So Alfred, I want to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. Today I'm going to announce our mission plan. Our mission is to launch an educational and spiritual enrichment revolution to build hope, resilience, and healing through community empowerment. And the League of Extraordinary People's vision is to establish a transformational, integrative, and replicable self-healing center of extraordinary people. This residential community model will heal transgenerational trauma through a foundation of safety, trustworthiness, and transparency, peer support, collaboration, and mutuality, empowerment of voice and choice, and purposely alleviating historical, ethnic, and cultural legacies. Elevating. Next. So the pair of ACEs, adverse childhood experience. Some of you guys might be familiar to adverse childhood experiences. For me, it's a little bit different. Mine's happened in the way of maternal depression, emotional and sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, divorce, mental health, mental illness, incarceration, homelessness, domestic violence, and substance abuse. I used to ask myself a question when I was getting clean and sober. If alcohol and drugs was the answer, then what was the question? In actuality, the elephant in the room is science, and it talks about adverse community environments, such as transgenerational poverty, discrimination, community disruption, lack of equal opportunity and economic mobility and social capital. Also, poor housing quality, affordability, and violence. So how many individuals in here really understand where this happens at in our lives? I know that a lot of individuals are really wondering about how ACEs impacts us so that we have so many homeless people in Seattle, not only in Seattle, but around the world. But for a lot of individuals, including me, the answer came in the way of the Adverse Childhood Experiences ACE study by Dr. Anda and Benson Fellini. So what I found out during my research was that babies are social mammals with social mammalian needs. And so a lot of us don't really understand that during our first 3 years of childhood, in actuality, from the ages of 1 to 3, that 90% of our brain develops during that time. But if we don't have that maturation period with our parents, where we're actually in bonding with them, and so them loving us and them feeding us from breast milk, in actuality, what happens is our neural network doesn't get laid out. So our brain architecture is compromised. And when our brain architecture is compromised, it causes shrinkage in the prefrontal cortex and our hippocampus. We have problems with our neural pathways. We need to rewire our brain from our old thoughts and patterns. And we have hormonal problems, toxic elimination problems, nervous system problems, immune system, cellular change, neurotransmitters, and brain waves. So a lot of this is because we allowed machines to do the work that our parents used to do in our tribal days. Next slide, please. Early development. So when you look at adverse childhood experiences, kind of look at it from a zone of historical trauma, historical information. what's going on inside of our bodies and our brains is key to us developing as human beings. And so since we're not around our parents in our early development, our caregiver, which is our mother, when she becomes into a traumatic experience, and what happens is that she releases cortisol, and that baby absorbs the cortisol and is placed in the placenta. I don't know if a lot of you guys know anything about the HPA, but the HPA is the hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenaline glands. And that's actually our homeland security. And it impacts also our central nervous system. And so in our central nervous system, we have our limbic system also, and we have our autonomic nervous system, which comprises the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So what happens when our HPA is compromised, it causes brain fog, fatigue, cognitive problems, migraines, sleep disruption, and depression. This happens in our older years. So primarily when your caregiver is struggling to regulate, and I'm talking about between anxiety and depression, and then they have an attachment relationship between the dad, and that's impacted. This can impact the child's development of a core sense of self, the ability to integrate experiences, and which causes epigenetic expressions. Epigenetics is where, when we go back to the two trees, Melissa, we'll talk about poverty, discrimination, community disruption, lack of opportunity, poor housing. All these impact the child's development, but they actually impact the child's neurobiology. Does this make any sense to anyone? It's also, we have a chat box, and so if anybody has any questions that they want to ask while we're searching through some of these slides, please feel free to ask a question, because that'll keep me more on point with what we're going through today. Because in actuality, adverse childhood experiences needs to be a class. Needs to be a class that we teach and provide individuals with the information that's needed, because during adversity, during childhood, it causes epigenetic shifts. Size and shape of the brain changes, neural pruning, telomeres. All this appearing in brain and body pathways and brain connectivity problems. Nobody talks about what's underneath the hood. Whenever you go buy a new car, you always get a book so you can understand what's going on with your car, so you can be able to operate your car better. But what's happening in today's society is that parents are not allowed to really parent their children because they're too busy working in the environment, attending to other people's needs. And so also too, in our first years of life, from the age from 1 to 12, what's actually in control is the limbic system. And the limbic system is where emotions are made, and it sends information to the prefrontal cortex to produce conscious feelings. So a lot of us that you see as adults, we're actually living in our limbic brain instead of our prefrontal cortex. And it says that a person who has a caregiver with untreated trauma may be more prone to PTSD and trauma, or struggle to reparent after conflict. And so because of the way I grew up and all the critical innuendos I received as a child, it caused me to actually not trust people. And also too, I didn't trust my mom, I didn't trust my dad. It's almost like, and the reason why I didn't trust him, because my dad wasn't around and my mom wasn't available. A lot of us don't really understand that if we're not in close proximity with our children and playing with them daily and learning from their facial expressions, and they learning from our facial expressions, we're going to have a really hard time with that individual later on in life. And so that's what the ACEs study does. It tells us what our neural pathway should be like. And there's also 7 ways that childhood adversity affects our brain neurobiologically. Next slide, please. How does ACEs relate to experienced homelessness in adulthood? This is actually some research that we obtained from Seattle University. Melissa, can you help me out there and explain this slide?
Yeah, absolutely. So this really connects a lot to what Alfred was describing a few moments ago. And Alfred, I have a question too for you to kind of tie this back together. But as you can see on the bottom of the graph, we have incident of ACEs. So that's the number of adverse childhood experiences that a person might have had. And then the percent of those people as adults experiencing homelessness. So the graph very clearly shows that quite exponential increase from having experienced no adverse childhood experiences up through having up to 8 adverse childhood experiences. And so, Alfred, what I'm wondering is if you can kind of connect your experience when we look at this information of the pair of ACEs, when you were a child and sort of the experiences that you had, how that contributed then to this pathway and trajectory of your life that led to you experiencing homelessness for a number of years.
Actually, adverse childhood experiences is related to parenting. And because my parents didn't have the appropriate information to be able to parent me with, it caused substantial problems. So it's not even about parenting, it's about basic information. And since I'm Black, we didn't get all the benefits that people would get who weren't of color. And so this causes adverse childhood experiences comes from intergenerational and historical trauma, which causes a disrupted neurodevelopment, social, emotional, and cognitive impairment, and adoption of health risk behaviors like drugs and alcohol, disease, disability, and social problems, and early death. A lot of the things that I'm really finding out in my age now as I'm fighting this fibromyalgia and liver cancer, and I'm watching my life being pulled from me slowly, is the fact that we didn't get the appropriate information, we didn't get the appropriate food, we didn't get the appropriate housing. And when I say we, I mean Black and Indigenous and people of color. And this has been going on historically. And so as a matter of fact, the maternal depression, emotional sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, divorce, mental illness, incarceration, homelessness, domestic violence, and substance abuse is all a manufacturation of what's going on in the world today. They knew the outcomes of adverse community environments, that it was going to cause poverty, discrimination, community disruption. This happened in 1920. And if I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with Howard Zinn's book, People's History of the United States, but in 1920, right after the Spanish flu, we had a big revolution behind labor. And it talks about the living wage. And we're having that same issue today. We're not getting paid a livable wage to be able to even deal with society today. There's so many people, probably more than 40 to 50% of the nation are struggling with adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments, but they haven't put it up on the website. They haven't connected the dots. The elephant in the room with adverse childhood experiences and adverse community environments is the science. It's the statistics that supports it. 63 to 85% of America has experienced adverse childhood experiences or trauma. And then also too, we don't know the difference between our prefrontal cortex and our limbic brain. Our limbic brain is our lizard brain. There's several books out in the community now, and they really talks about this. And they got a really good book called My Grandmother's Hands, and it talks about racialized trauma and the pathway to mending our hearts and bodies. A lot of us don't realize that the youth of the day are actually operating under extreme chronic stress, and this impacts our neurobiology. And when I say it impacts our neurobiology, it impacts our HPA axis. Our central nervous system isn't able to operate because we're always in our sympathetic. We never get released over to the parasympathetic, and so thus we're operating between anxiety and depression. And this causes a serious impact on children. The children can't even play with their moms and dads because the environment has taken them away from having that experience of having a loving parent, having somebody to be attached. So you see where it says the attachment relationship between the caregiver and child may be strained. That impacts a child's neurobiology. That impacts a child's neurobiology, not just for that period of time when they're trying to lay down the neural network and grid, but it impacts their adulthood. It also impacts illness. It also impacts the reason why so many of our people in our community are impulsive and compulsive, and why we have so many challenges with our young adults challenging us is because they have attachment disorders. And the attachment disorders because they don't know who to trust. You know, your parents say they love you, they give you things, but that's not love. We need more hand-on-hand training. We need more information. We don't have bad kids, we create bad kids. And so when we look at our HPA axis, our central nervous system, our limbic system, and autonomic nervous system, and if we go into the definitions of each one of those terms, and that's what's kind of that I'm kind of just feeling uneasy with this whole topic here today, because I realize there's so many people out here in the community that really want to know. I spent 40 years out in the streets, and my primary drug of choice was opiates and cocaine. And so subsequently, I've been through a whole lot. And then in 2004, when I got out of prison, 9 days later, I swallowed a quarter ounce of crack and died and was paralyzed. And I think what we need to do is instill hope into our communities and our loved ones by explaining this to them, that self-medicating is not about addiction, it's about self-regulating their homeostasis. We're living bodies, we're cells, and so what's been happening now is we don't really know our value. And I think it's very important for us to really learn our value, to learn about the limbic system, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, and how amazing our brain is, and that our limbic system controls our information and our emotions, and that the prefrontal cortex doesn't start to develop until the age of 12 and is not fully developed until almost the third decade of our existence, that are between the ages of 25 to 30, depending on your parents and the environment that you grew up in. What's most important here, though, is nutrition. Nutrition is so important. A lot of us eat food today, but a lot of us need to really take a look at the doctors we go to. I highly suggest that we start looking at functional medicine doctors so that we can understand how our body works. What they didn't teach us is how our body works and how we need to take care of our bodies. And so if you toggle back to the 2 trees, Melissa, our focus is always on the environment that we live in and our experiences. And then also too, how do we filter this life through each other? And how can we sit down and talk and be frank about our adverse childhood experiences? What we need to do is create a new environment that is not so adverse to the people who live in it. We're trying to turn people into machines, and that's what's wrong with America today. FaceTime in front of your child is more important than the TV. And the new crack is actually Twitter, Facebook, and all the social media. We're so focused on them that we forget that our children need love. They need a warm embrace. They need a trusting face. And they need somebody that's going to be succinct, that's going to be honest with them and tell them that I don't know when they don't know. That really inform us that we're human beings and we're not human machines. And so that we can understand our bodies so we can work as a team. See, what's different is now is that we got big tribes of people. So the adverse community environments creates these huge tribes of people, and they're blended. And so all we do is go to work and we come home, and go to work and we come home. But man didn't make man. God created man. And all the way that we're going to get through this, you guys, is through good, orderly direction. And you know, we need holding environments because we don't need treatment. We need healing centers. We need to be able to talk to them and embrace them as and love on them like they was meant to be loved on. One of the biggest things I notice is not the influx of what spirituality really means. And also the fact that we need to start making better ways for our people in the community. A lot of us have been historically traumatized. And now I'm just talking about the Black Americans, but I'm talking about all the immigrants that came over back during the 1920s and 1900s. All of us have been oppressed in some way, fashion, or form by adverse community environments, and this has caused an impact on our neurobiology. And when that causes an impact on our neurobiology, then everybody suffers. The impact of adverse babyhood experiences, it causes autism, asthma, cancer, and this is in children. Adverse babyhood experiences increases the risk for chronic illness and maternal complications. Depression, anxiety, bipolar, diabetes, high blood pressure, immune dysfunction, insulin resistance, kidney failure, liver failure, maternal complications, death, multiple sclerosis. All these things is because our bodies have been compromised by the domestication and the dream of the planet. We forget that we are people, and that if you really want to know the truth about adverse babyhood experiences, adverse childhood experiences, take a look at Veronique Mead's Chronic Illness and Adverse Babyhood Experiences fact sheet. And she also has studies, and it talks about the risk factors for chronic illness and other effects when it talks about children. And so there's actually a questionnaire for that also. Melissa, is there any questions in the audience?
Well, I think this is actually a perfect time to transition to our breakout room question. Jordan, are you ready for me to put that up here, and then we can send folks to the breakout room for a bit of time?
Yeah, that sounds great.
And we will also drop this question in the chat as well, so that you have it in your breakout rooms and you don't have to memorize it.
Awesome. And for those of you who are not service providers that don't work directly with folks experiencing homelessness, I invite you to consider this question and how you might perhaps interact with your community members who are living unhoused, or you know, just how you engage around the subject of those experiencing homelessness. So I'm going to go ahead and send everybody to a breakout room now.
Okay, so what you see, the image on the screen here is a Hoberman sphere, and I have one here for us. We use this with children as young as toddlers and preschool age, and as old as high school and even adults. I literally keep it in front of me and have coworkers who remind me, Melissa, get your breathing ball. And so this is a Hoberman sphere. It functions also as a breathing ball. So as we walk through the breaths together, it's going to be an inhale as it opens. We'll hold, so we're going to do a 4-sided breath. It'll be in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, and we'll do that 3 times together. If you can't do the numbers, it's totally fine. Just breathe with what's most comfortable for your lungs and for your body. So in for 4 together, hold for 4, out for 4, and hold for 4. And we will do that for 2 more repetitions. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and hold for 4. And once more, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and hold for 4. So that's just an opportunity that you can recenter yourself very quickly, very easily. The 4-sided breath is a quick go-to one that can really help when we might be feeling dysregulated or just need to kind of recenter ourselves in the moment. And Alfred, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you for this next slide. Are you ready for it?
Yes, I'm ready. And so welcome back, everybody. I need to put something down here right now for you guys to really understand this, because I don't think that you guys fully understand what ACE is all about. And so I have a plethora of articles. You know, I'm a nerd, but I want to tell you about trauma's neurobiological signature. The word trauma is often used in conversation to describe a range of stressful everyday experiences, yet not all stress changes a person's neurobiology or the ability to feel emotionally safe. Psychological trauma, a form of chronic traumatic stress, is felt emotionally and physically and affects brain circuitry, including altering the stress response system. And the stress response system, you guys, is the limbic brain. And what is experienced as trauma psychologically differs across individuals. Psychological trauma includes the individual's subject perception of what is traumatic. Key factors that influence this variation include prior trauma, developmental stage, severity of trauma exposure, and the involvement of interpersonal relationships. For example, adolescents are especially sensitive to social stresses from peer influences compared with children and adults. Additionally, knowledge about historical traumas such as the effects of African Americans' experience of slavery and epigenetic transmission informs understandings of individuals' vulnerability to psychological trauma. Recognizing the neurobiological underpinnings of psychological trauma is essential to service providers' application of trauma-informed skills. And so when we're looking at this slide here, window of tolerance action steps, a lot of us don't even really understand, and I didn't know this neither until I did the research after 40 years of being a chronically high utilizer of public funds, is that our heart and our brain has a communication, and the heart communicates with the brain and the body in 4 ways. And the first one is neurological communication, or the nervous system. The second one is biochemical communication, or hormonal system. And then we have a biophysical communication, which is our pulse wave, and then an energetic communication, which are electromagnetic fields. And that happens inside our brains, you guys. So a lot of us are really not understanding that our HPA axis is actually our homeland security. And so it's the one that tells us which way to go and what to do. It impacts our prefrontal cortex, and it impacts our limbic brain. And so when it talks about the window of tolerance for trauma, anxiety-related responses, we keep thinking that we need to go to doctors and get medication for trauma or anxiety. But it says when we're hyper-aroused, when we're in our limbic brain to fight, flight, or freeze, or actually annihilation or rage, we're in our sympathetic part of our autonomic nervous system where rigidness takes place, obsessive compulsive behavior or thoughts, overeating, restricting, addictions, impulsivity. We're overwhelmed. We have chaotic responses, outbursts, emotional or aggressive, anger, aggression, or rage. We really need to understand that this is about our homeostasis. Our bodies are out of balance. It's not our brains that's out of balance. In actuality, what I'm trying to tell you guys is that it's not our psychology that's being agitated here. It's our physiology as human beings. And this is what this window of tolerance is all about. It talks about the hyperaroused and the freeze response. So remember, the limbic brain, this is the limbic brain, you guys. And so the freeze response is a feigned depth response or disassociation. Or sometimes we feel like we're not present. Notice I said feel like. I didn't say anything about it thinking within even anywhere in this. And so it's unavailable. We shut down, memory loss. This is automatic, you guys. And then we're disconnected. We go on autopilot, or we're flat. No display of emotions, separate from self, feelings and emotions. And so what we need to do is learn how to get into our comfort zone. The only way we can learn how to get into our comfort zone, you guys, is to learn how to emotionally regulate ourselves. Ask your parents how come that nobody taught them how to emotionally regulate themselves so they can be cool, calm, and collective and connected. You know, they see all that stuff on TV, but nobody knows how to do it. You know what I mean? And then the ability to self-soothe and the ability to regulate our emotional state. And so on the right here, it says to stay in the window of tolerance, what we need to do daily is learn mindfulness. Mindfulness is part of being aware, being present in the here and now, knowing your surroundings, grounding exercises, and that helps promote a resiliency. Techniques of self-soothing, calming the body, and sometimes grounding exercises, you guys, are just turning everything off and just listening to yourself and actually start writing down about how you feel and how you think at the same time, and realize that we need to bring these congruent, we need to bring these together. So the only way we're going to do that is by updating our software. And so emotional regulation, you know, and so some people think they might be in love, but they might just be having some emotional regulation problems, you know, and deep, slow breathing, like Melissa just showed us, you know. Those breathing exercises is what I do to center myself when I have anxiety, when I get to thinking about this liver cancer I have. The fibromyalgia I have is because I'm stuck in my sympathetic nervous system, and all my joints, I'm just tight all the time. I'm just tight, I'm rigid, and so my muscles are atrophying towards that way. So I have to do all these different things, you guys, in order to be able to be whole, you know, and then recognize my limiting beliefs and counter with positive statements about myself and make new choices. You know, I got to stop, you know, everybody talks to themselves, you know, but you got to talk to yourself differently. You know what I mean? Because if you're waiting for somebody to pat you on the back, they might be trying to stick the steering wheel in it and setting it on drive. You know what I mean? And so it causes also, our limbic brain causes us to go out of the window of tolerance, and that's fear. Our limbic brains are activated on fear. And that's the unconscious thought, either real or imagined, you guys. Did you hear what I said? Unconscious thought. And then also the bodily feeling of fear. And then how do we control that bodily feeling? And then unsafe. And then a lot of us go and self-medicate. And then they say, I do not exist. And that's where suicide rides at. And then abandonment. And so when you don't have a good relationship with your parents, you can't have a good relationship with nobody else. And so we learn our communication skills, everything that we didn't want to learn and said we would never be like when we were at home with our parents. And the reason why I left when I was 13, because I couldn't take it no more. You end up being, you know, because that's huge, 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 you know. And so when you're not safe at home, you can't be safe in your head. You can't be safe in the streets. You can't do nothing but be scared, you know. And so, you know, trauma-related care, beliefs about self-care trigger emotional and psychological and physiological, and dysregulation occurs. And so in actuality, it's our homeostasis that we're seeking, you guys.
Alfred, something that you said when folks were in the breakout rooms, I wanted to tie into this. Do you remember what that was, or do you want me to say it?
No, you have to say it.
Yeah. So one of the things Alfred mentioned, he said the path to homelessness starts in childhood. And I think that really ties into everything that we're talking about, especially on this slide and that window of tolerance, Alfred, and then even just ACEs as well. So we have about 8 minutes left before our time closes today. So I'm going to go ahead and move us into the question and answer time. And I know, let's see, we've got some chats coming in. Jordan, you can jump in too and let me know. I think I'd seen one question earlier, and Alfred, I'm not sure if this is research that you've read. When we were talking about adverse childhood experiences and the impacts that it can have, like neurobiologically, Amanda asked, would this be considered an acquired brain injury? Have you read anything on that topic?
So you know, I have brain injuries. I have TBIs, and so I can't say. Restate that again for me, Melissa.
The question was if having adverse childhood experiences is considered an acquired brain injury. So not necessarily like the things that you experienced that did cause that brain damage, but like if the neurobiological changes that happen. I didn't know if you've read anything on that.
That's called epigenetics. That's called epigenetics. And so that's part of our natural.
Yeah, great. Another question that we had is, can we talk about how to help build resilience?
Oh God, ask me. You know, I do it every day. You know what I mean? You just keep fighting for your life. You know, you read books, I research. You know, I don't go to TV for answers. You know, I have a science evidence-based research that I do to find out the answers. I'm not going to go and talk to Ray, Pookie, and Shaniqua. I'm not going to keep going to the places that they talk about their treatment centers. I don't need a treatment center. I need a healing center. I need a place that was not going to use me to be a product. You know, they've taken and used people as a cash crop in America. And that's a shame. It's a different form of slavery. It's on another level, but it's just another devil. You know what I mean? And so really people need to understand that, man, that they're just predicating on us, you know? And so the number one thing for the election this year is you need to vote, because we need public health, you guys. This is through how all this stuff happened, is public health, man. We should get the information, man. Don't put me in treatment, man. I don't need treatment. Just tell me the truth, you know, because then I wouldn't have liver cancer right now. I wouldn't have all these autoimmune disorders. I got fibromyalgia, and one of my members of my family told, oh, that's a female disease. Oh, dude, you know what I mean? And I just had to turn them off. I know that where that comes from. And that's some of that old rhetoric from at home. And so I couldn't buy into that stuff because I know it's from toxic stress. It's from not having inappropriate parents that had me when they was too young to even know who they was as an adult. And then especially if you're being black, a lot of people don't understand. When I was a kid, that I was making $1.25 an hour. Did you hear what I'm saying? And then being black on top of that, and blacks didn't start, was able to vote until 1968. And then from 1968 to 1975, if a woman was on welfare and she was of color, she wasn't even allowed, the federal government enforced this. She wasn't even allowed to have a man in the home. So how can you raise a family with only one individual? It takes 3 individuals to raise one child. And that's neurobiologically. Does that make sense to anybody?
Yeah, thank you, Alfred. Another question that came through, do you have a favorite book on resilience?
Oh God, I got a plethora of books. I got a plethora. It depends on your ethnicity. But if I was going to have some mainstay books, I would take Emotional Sobriety by Tion Dayton. The book that I just announced, My Grandmother's Hands, Scared Sick, Childhood Disrupted by Donna Jackson Nakasawa. Yeah, I just, you know, what you guys really need to do is we just need to start a series on this. This is too much to give you guys. You know, they say clearly there's a strong link between homelessness and trauma in early childhood. Poorly addressed complex trauma is a major risk factor of long-term homelessness and poor mental health outcomes. So if we got airplanes and we got electric cars, how come they ain't told us about this? You know what I'm saying? Duh, come on, they want to market everything to us, including life. You understand what I'm saying? So if you don't believe in God, you better believe in some good orderly direction, because if it wasn't for spirituality and faith, did you hear what I said, faith, I wouldn't be here today, you guys. I swallowed a 1/4 ounce of crack cocaine, died and was paralyzed. Spent 2 years at Union Gospel Mission Behavior Modification Treatment Program. Went on to be on the Dean's List and be put on the front page of the Seattle PI, where they quoted me from a street pimp to the Dean's List. Now, did I want to be a street pimp for the rest of my life? No, but they claimed it. But what about all these other pimps that they got out here with these titles? That's all they doing, you know, because this, to me, this thing about addiction and mental health and stuff, this is a pimp move. You know what I mean? They're not telling the people the truth about how we're supposed to live as human beings. They think we're actually an actual product. If Jeff Bezos could sell us, you know, he would probably do that too. You know what I mean? We're people. We make machines. Machines don't make us. We can't keep allowing machines to take over our lives, and people who don't look like us and talk like us and who being oppressed by us not be in a room of change. There's no diversity, inclusion, or equity. We have 1.5 acres out in King County that what we want to do is open up a residential center of excellence for healing, especially for the Black and Indigenous and people of color. And we're looking for members from the community to step forward. I know a whole lot of things, but project development is not something that I know how to do. And so as a whole person and the team-based focus that we want to bring to the community, you guys, we're asking you, we're inviting you, and I'm inviting you personally to come join us. Come join us. It's all about each one, reach one, teach one. And so we don't stay on one level, you know, where we look down on people. You know what I mean? We need to look up to everybody we see and ask them, you know, how can I help you? Or what happened to you? We can't keep having this treatment model. There's some damaged people out here, and our neurobiology has been damaged. Yes, I'm talking about our wiring. And just like I explained to you before, they got an article called The Science of the Heart, Volume 2. And in Chapter 1, it talks about the heart-brain communication. And then it talks about coherence. We have so many more things about ourselves that nobody's ever explained to us, you guys. And because I've been oppressed by this, and also too, because they said I was pretty smart when I was younger, that we need to recalibrate ourselves. We need what we call rebooting ourselves. And so I want to challenge you guys and challenge Jordan to allow us to create a software app where we update our software.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alfred. And I want to also mention another book-related opportunity that we have starting up in November is actually going to be a book club for Emotional Sobriety by Tion Dayton that Alfred mentioned. So if you follow us on our social media pages at TLOEP1, so for the League of Extraordinary People, and that's information, again, when we send out the resources to everyone who's registered, the list of things that Alfred mentioned today, the slides, all of that. We will include links to that as well, and so you can find us there, but we want to have that offered as a continuum of care series and really work through rebooting our emotional sobriety. So that's another opportunity that we have coming up. And I see, Jordan, that we're right at 11 o'clock. Do you have any closing comments to share with the group, Jordan?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Alfred and Melissa. We really appreciate what you had said. You know, I think it's really important. Yes, we can give them a Zoom round of applause. Thank you, Alfred. And I know it was quick, you know, trying to pack in, you know, understanding of ACEs as well as trauma-informed care, as well as resiliency. Like, we could do an entire series about this. And so I'm thrilled for the surface level introduction that you've given us, Alfred, for sharing your personal experience and your wisdom with us. And as Melissa mentioned, I'm going to send out a list of resources and things we had talked about. Definitely check out their stuff, check out their website, support what Alfred is doing. And yeah, I look forward to.
One thing, Jordan, because there's some providers in the room, and maybe you need to write this down. And there's an article, and it talks about the intergenerational associations of parent adverse childhood experiences and child health outcomes. That's an article that you guys should Google it. Actually, just Google me, and I'll send you this article because it's very imperative to the work that you do, to understand the connections.
We'll include that when we respond to the registrant list. So thanks everyone so much for joining us. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of your Wednesday, the rest of your week, and take care.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Again, appreciate it.